Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jelena Novakovic. I'm a research assistant at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to moderate the session of Postdigital Art and Culture. Since we had a presentation cancellation from Michael Lidgau, I want to remind you all that you now have 16 minutes for each presentation, and we will give you assigned to presenters when there are 2 minutes left. So after hearing 3 presentations, we will have around 20 minutes for the questions for the audience. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the first presenter for today. His name is Drago Indjic. He is an industrial professor of fintech at the UCL Institute of Finance and Technology and an assistant professor of economics at the Union University of Belgrade. The title of this presentation is Recapturing Creative and Contractual Digital Identity, written with Aleksandra Markovic. Drago, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope this is now going to be fine. Sharing my screen and everything else. And I'm doing this presentation on behalf of my co-author, Dr. Aleksandra, who just couldn't make it. And please excuse me for some slight misunderstandings in legal context of this paper. This is a work that is resulting from over a year of several collaborative projects. And each of these illustrations can be clicked in order to follow links to a paper or a YouTube video. And I'm really grateful to my co-author, Carol Edrich, in the last few papers, and our artist friend, Jonathan Kwesi, and 2 universities who have provided even some funding for this research. What I will do today is present 2 experiments that led us into this legal tech and dance tech direction. Then I will follow up with some criticism of current business to consumer model in performing arts. And this will enable me to focus on the question of digital identity that is then extended into creative identity and collaborative identity in these projects, that is then expanded in direction of legal context of digital assets and digital contracts. And hopefully there will be a couple of minutes left to discuss the roadmap that we will be following. The next 2 slides are real experiments that have been carried out in London artistic community that I've learned about a couple of years ago. The first one by Jonathan Kwesi was an app that was offered to anyone who wanted to play a home theater, whereby instructions have been provided and the script could have been followed, either together with a friend who is sitting across your kitchen table, or someone who is, I don't know, sitting in Belgrade right now. And this app was very informative about a possibility of creating art that is collaborative and immersive, and with a lot of theory behind that I shouldn't be explaining because now I'm not an expert in performing arts. That experiment was followed by another experiment in dance, in performing arts, where a DanceGRIST that my co-author Carol Edrich is running is using a similar script to choreograph the artists who will be receiving some instructions in terms of specific concepts that they will try to interpret through a dance. A beauty of this app was that similar concepts like loneliness or unemployment or fear could have been transposed in many different cultures, and dances on the left, I think, are somewhere in Africa. I can't remember if that was in Nairobi. While on the right-hand side, we have people who are across on a couple of continents like Canada and London, etc. And a beauty of this is that observing this interpretive dance is going to provide far more data on concepts and art than any other neural net text training data can do. So observing what these artists have been doing for a few years made me thinking that there is a case to build a new type of performing art apps that will be providing a far more experiential application or experience. A very bad choice of words, I must admit, because instead of performing a duty or a role in a metaverse through your avatar, you're giving a proper physical podium. This is a proper shared art scene, and people participating or playing in these apps are not simply collectors of art. They're not really interested in collectibles, or they don't even just watch, or they're not simply fans. They are far more than a passive consumer of art. And by pushing this specific direction in art, this gradient is evolving from a distinction that is really self-censored into something that is more collective. And in doing so, this is also bridging the gap between us and as artists and them as audience. And looking at the design of these apps from a technological and financial and legal perspective made me thinking that the challenge is not going to be technology itself. Technology exists, but it will be in some principles that are driving economics of these marketplaces, because components to build a new generation of these apps already exist. They can be taken off the shelf. Creative people like Kwesi and Carol Edrich exists. But what is missing is this value chain in the sense that the product, this digital art that these apps are producing is not fairly treated. And that is a hard challenge, because it can be proved by looking at digital platforms for distribution of digital content that the creative artists like Kwesi or Edrich are actually pwned. Pwned is a computer security expression. When somebody is taking over your identity, it is a form of cyber attack. And looking at old example of music and royalties in music, and the case of Spotify that most people are familiar with, is very informative, because the middle number of 70% is amount of money that is going to be taken by the platform and redistributed to some other parties of this contract, definitely not the songwriter or performer. And this is just the beginning, because in performing arts, you will realize that there are many unsigned artists, that performance are not very well paid. And Carol would always ask me to point out that the average income of a dancer in United Kingdom is around £5,000 per year, which is definitely not a living wage. And that creates this unfavorable situation where even if digital asset, the piece, the artistic piece, goes viral and becomes a meme, that resulting economic effect will be down to zero, zilch, nil. And in order to understand how this situation can be rectified, a quick tour through internet over the last 30 years can point out possible directions. And over the last 30 years, internet evolved for something called Web 1.0, where one could simply read and consume generated content, into something where we can start contributing content, Web 2.0, if we create accounts that are still under control of big tech companies and platforms like YouTube or TikTok or BeReal. But where we are now for several years is in the realm of the latest generation of Web 3.0, where we can try to build up components that would enable us to reclaim or redistribute this power. How is this possible? And is it possible at all? Is something that has been demonstrated and proved beyond doubt by Bitcoin as an experiment. And some famous sociologists are pointing out, like Cory Doctorow, what the future destiny is. And in order to understand the possibility of making disruption in performing arts, we can consider two parts of solution to this problem. One is to address the concept of digital identity, which is very fundamental in finance on internet. And this money tree is actually figure taken from a Bank of International Settlement, fintech representation, where one can spot digital identity or data protection as the fundamental concept in if you like world of finance. And identity on internet is composed of several layers, where one should be going through validation of identity, proving that you are actually a physical person, and going through authentication, and finally some form of scoring mechanism or reputation. All this is done every day. Every time you touch your mobile phone or try to log on in a website or do any financial transaction, you are actually exposed and you are going through this process. What can go wrong in today's internet is something that is not appreciated enough. On left side, you have typical Apple, iTunes, iCloud, whatever login, where you realize that this device that you hold in your hand, your phone, is under total control of Apple as a company. And on the right side, you have a diagram of money flows in a typical a royalty scheme for music, where cash that is generating through streaming platforms is going to be redistributed to several other entities, like a musical publisher or producers, etc. And this chart is also clickable, and if you are interested, you can read far more about agencies involved and actors. What we are trying to do is to go beyond a typical digital distribution platform and try to figure out the type of apps that are going to be useful for spontaneous physical gigs on the street, and real person-to-person transactions without getting institutions involved. And this led to a paper that we have published last year, where Edrich provided the concept of a new generation of apps that should be used to facilitate this grassroots, ground-up collaborative development of art that is hyper-local, but also help creatives to register copyrights and control distribution and the market for digital content that is produced. The idea is to avoid going through traditional digital media platforms and ideally come up with the idea of a protocol designed that is currently open and unresolved in app stores. And in order to do that, one has to reimagine the concept of digital wallet rather than a digital account. So this is something that can be borrowed from a crypto asset community, and also consider what has been done in terms of indexing context and digital art. And one example of licensing digital content is Europeana API that would enable you to license and reuse content that is a digital representation of museum pieces across European Union. What we need that is something that can be customized for performance, not for museums and museum pieces. To deliver that, and this is not just a dream, one can go in the direction of Web 3.0, where very strong mechanisms for controlling data that you create can be facilitated, where the locus of these apps would be actual citizen rather than a business or legal entity, and links with the data, this provenance of your data can be controlled, etc. And one of these mechanisms called Inrupt is a mechanism that has been proposed and is offered by Tim Berners-Lee, the gentleman who actually invented World Wide Web some 30 years ago. So these are components that are available today off the shelf. These components can enable creators or performers to establish digital sovereignty, where the creator can control how is content presented to others. And every single piece of that content can be indexed appropriately by using of a specific protocol called Decentralized ID. And if this is carried out completely, then the asset ownership that is currently delegated to businesses, including, for example, my co-author's business, Donimus, which is a music publishing house, and marketed through these catalogs where you can search for a specific genre and even including, as you can see, forbidden music, etc., can be avoided. These digital identifiers that are available today can represent just about anything. And I hope I have a few minutes left if yes, okay. Can be assigned not just to people or objects in scenes. They can be assigned even to collectives, like gigs themselves. And one example how this is possible in practice is something that we are all familiar now with, are COVID QR codes, verifiable credentials behind these COVID vaccination certificates, digital certificates. They went obviously very viral a couple of years ago, and technology behind these credentials is actually technology that can drive digital identity. The next step, which is harder, disruption is actually much harder in this domain, is to protect these digital assets as digital property. Mechanisms to do so have been available for many years behind DVDs and music where little files embedded in every single DVD have been able to code these deontic logic forms like permissions and fines and duties for a specific region or specific type of distribution of a digital asset. And our idea is that digital art assets can...
Drago, can you hear us? You have to wrap up your presentation because we have the two more participants, so we will have time for discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely fine. Apologies for this. So I'm happy to wrap up if there is any time. Proceed accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Drago. Next, we will hear Çağdaş Duman. He's a PhD student in English literature in Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. He is also a researcher of the interdisciplinary project AI as Author, hosted by Koç University and supported by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey. He will present Artificial Intelligence and Authorship Through a Literary Lens, a paper written with Imke van Heerden and Anil Baz. Çağdaş, let's hear your presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction. You can see the screen, right? And hear my voice? Okay, wonderful. So today I'm going to present our paper co-written by Dr. Van Heerden and Dr. Baz, which is called Artificial Intelligence and Authorship Through a Literary Lens. The past year has been momentous for natural language generation, a subfield of artificial intelligence interested in the automation of writing. Among the ranks of large language models, OpenAI's GPT-3 is now joined by powerful contenders such as Google's Lambda and Palm, Meta's OPT, and Hugging Face's Bloom. Within the publishing industry as well, the ethics of AI moves intellectual property to the forefront, whilst academic disciplines such as law, media studies, digital humanities grapple with reconceptualizations of authorship. Although, as some have indicated, the discussion stands to benefit from literary theoretical approaches, literary scholars have been relatively slow to engage the field. So we seek to address this gap by providing an expressly literary perspective on the notion of AI authorship. I will give an overview of literary theoretical perspectives on authorship, text and textuality, readership and interpretation. I'll briefly revisit critical approaches from the first and second halves of the 20th century, as well as more contemporary turns in theory. Our question is, what possibilities or impossibilities can literary approaches to creative text generation reveal? Okay, so starting with the modernist approaches and new criticism, an unmistakable example that comes to mind is T.S. Eliot and modernist poetics. In his prominent essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, Eliot opposes the romantic notion of the poet, arguing that the progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality. So to Eliot, tradition indeed exists. However, it is perpetually in motion in the sense that the depersonalized poet constantly re-explores and redefines tradition. This presupposes that tradition exists, but it is deliberately reconceived at the expense of poetic personality. And so a potentially explorable and interesting question would be, could the AI author or poet establish its own traditions and, rather than latching onto those traditions, continually redefine it at the expense of its literary personality? Halfway through the 20th century, literary scholars Wimsatt and Beardsley problematized authorial intent in their influential essay, The Intentional Fallacy. They argue that the design or intention of the author is neither available nor desirable as a standard for judging the success of a work of literary art. So they stress that literary work as it is complex and public. They also emphasize that literary works are more than what their authors intend to be. They are beyond the individualized or indeed authorialized intention. So reducing these works to authorial intention amounts to the limitation of criticism. And so a prominent question would be, can we learn to read machine-generated texts without resorting to intention, which, as Wimsatt and Beardsley argue, is neither available nor desirable? According to the well-known linguist and philosopher Saussure, as he expounds in his highly influential course in general linguistics, language is a self-contained system of science in which the only essential thing is the union of meanings and sound images. Each of these signs, as famous literary scholar Terry Eagleton emphasizes, was to be seen as being made up of a signifier, a sound image or its graphic equivalent, and a signified, the concept or meaning. Moreover, Saussure writes that the bond between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. By drawing attention to this arbitrariness, Saussure stresses that there's no natural connection between the signifier and the signified. As he suggests, in language, there are only differences. So taking structuralist views on language into consideration, could we state that language models learn this self-contained linguistic system in which meaning-making processes are based on difference? And with the advent of post-structuralist approaches and critiques of authorship, what we encounter is a more complex emphasis on difference and textual uncertainty. Derrida's deconstructive criticism, for instance, demonstrates how texts come to embarrass their own ruling systems of logic and enters into textual aporias or impasses of meaning, where texts get into trouble, come unstuck, offer to contradict themselves, as Terry Eagleton remarks. Textual meaning, then, is engendered through difference, since language, for Derrida, can't escape from what he coins as difference. As he accentuates, difference is continual differing and deferring. It is the play of differences. So deconstruction problematizes the very idea of foundation and origins of meaning, which are made of difference and delay, without substance and or center. Therefore, meaning is unceasingly undermined, especially within language, because it is in a process of endless postponement. Similarly, in Of Grammatology, he also writes that the person writing is inscribed in a determined textual system, so much so that, as he infamously states, there is nothing outside of the text. He underscores that what we call production, this is his writing, is necessarily a text, the system of a writing and of a reading, which we know is ordered around its own blind spot. Then the relevant question, perhaps, for us to explore would be, in what ways does the AI author, for instance, reflect textual uncertainty and undecidability? If the words are irreducibly unstable and the text is ordered around its own blind spot, could we say that machine learning models should be trained, and if so, how, in ways that pay heed to the complex uncertainties of the text? And then Roland Barthes, in his essay, The Death of the Author, debilitates the authority of what he calls the author god. He observes that writing is the destruction of every voice, of every point of origin. Writing is that neutral, composite, oblique space where our subject slips away, the negative where all identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body writing. Starting with the very identity of the body writing, the voice loses its origin. The author enters into his own death, and writing begins. Barthes also highlights that the author is effectively nothing but a limitation on the text. He contends to give a text an author is to impose a limit on that text. to furnish it with a final signified, to close the writing. So it wouldn't be wrong to say that BART offers to open the text to the necessary intrusion of the reader or critic. So taking these points into consideration, could we state that the AI author is already dead? If so, who or what would be the critic of its work? Who will read AI-written texts? How would it position itself next to textual pluralities and intertextual dimensions? Now that we are no longer in a hierarchical territory tyrannized by an authorial figure, perhaps post-critical approaches even further help us to underline textual heterogeneity and authorial non-presence, introducing new ways to interpret the texts that are beyond hierarchical position of the human in particular. For instance, for the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, as he writes in Critical and Clinical, to write is certainly not to impose a form of expression on the matter of lived experience. Literature rather moves in the direction of the ill-formed or the incomplete, always in the midst of being formed, and goes beyond the matter of any livable or lived experience. Writing is inseparable from becoming. In writing, one becomes woman, becomes animal or vegetable, becomes molecule to the point of becoming imperceptible. A potential question then is, could the AI author allow for new becomings? Would it necessarily further augment our inhumanity and multiplicity? And more recently, academic critic Rita Felsky, in her influential text, The Limits of Critique, proposes to question long-standing interpretative methodologies. Felsky asks, why is it that critics are so quick off the mark to interrogate, to unmask, expose, subvert, unravel, demystify, destabilize, take issue, and take umbrage? What intellectual and imaginative alternatives does it overshadow, obscure, or overrule? Why is critique so frequently feared as the most serious and unscrupulous form of thought? What intellectual and imaginative alternatives does it overshadow? And what are the costs of such ubiquitous criticality? So instead, Felsky recommends that we expand our repertoire of critical moods, making it open to a richer array of critical method that extol multiplicity, difference, and hybridity. Felsky doesn't posit the text as something from which we can deduce meaning by following supposedly its hidden traces, but she sees it as more like an entity with which we co-evolve and create meaning together. So post-critical reading, as Felsky writes, is a matter of attaching, of collating, negotiating, assembling, of forging links between that were previously unconnected. Reading is now conceived as an act of composition, of creative remaking that binds text and reader in ongoing struggles, translations, and negotiations. Will the AI author, possible questions are then would be, will the AI author give rise to overarching interpretative methodologies that are beyond mere interrogatory analyses? Could this phenomenon, for instance, lead to new literary movements? Some final remarks. So we seek to problematize the need to differentiate computer-generated texts from human-generated texts. And this is especially crucial in an era in which anthropocentrism is vehemently questioned and the concept of the human, as well as language and literature, are endlessly rethought, reassessed, and redefined. Our presentation proposes a direct engagement with emerging questions concerning the notion of the AI author. We offer that literary expertise, or more broadly, literary studies, should also be taken into consideration in creating and especially evaluating, assessing computer-generated texts. We are grateful to our funders, and these are our references. If you'd like to learn more about our project as author, you can visit our website. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jagdash. The next presentation we will hear is entitled The Mechanical Turkness, Tactical Media Art and the Critique of the Corporate AI. Here to present is DanceGRIST, an artist, researcher, and scholar. He was the visiting associate professor at the School of Art and Design and Media, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He was a co-founding associate professor with the Digital Art program at the Interdisciplinary Graduate Center at the University of Arts in Belgrade, and also a founding chair and associate professor at New Media Department at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Belgrade. We are very excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm also very excited to be introduced by you, my former student. So thank you all for being here, and let me just quickly share my screen. You should be able to see my screen share. Are we good to go? Okay, so this is the summary of my paper, The Mechanical Turkness, which provides a critical outlook on some of the approaches to corporate AI in tactical media art. AI art includes various poetic and expressive strategies informed by modern machine learning architectures. Its topics, methodologies, presentational formats, and implications are closely related to AI research, development, and application. So it is affected by the epistemic uncertainties, conceptual challenges, conflicted paradigms, discursive issues, ethical and socio-political problems of AI science and industry. Tactical practices in AI art continue the flux of tactical media art that has energized culture since the late 20th century, with hybrid forms of critical interventions into the technological, political, and economic layers of the neoliberal condition. One of the notable topics in tactical AI art is the infocapitalist paradigm of labor transparency, which allows corporate AI to maintain a long lineage of the abuse of human labor. The global market trends of AI are driven by relatively few corporations in close connection with the smaller enterprises, startups, academic projects, and independent researchers. The politics of this sector unfolds in defining and controlling the profit-oriented AI research, development, and application. Companies deploy AI in frameworks which reinforce their power structures, quote-unquote, optimize social management, and maximize labor. At the same time, they try to obscure the political interests of their products and to render their workforce transparent. Artists approach these issues in a variety of ways, and I centered this presentation around the examples in three informal categories: humans in the loop, outsourcing artistic labor, and behavioral modeling and aesthetic normalization. Corporate AI's human in the loop complex manifests most notoriously as the exploitative crowdsourcing of the transnational echelons of workers for dataset classification, annotation, and other essential tasks in AI design. Thanks to Amazon's cynical nomenclature and massive implementation of crowdsourced online work in the form of quote-unquote artificial intelligence or pseudo-AI, Wolfgang von Kempelen's chess-playing animatronic hoax, the Turk, on the left in this slide, has become a well-documented metaphor for the exploitation of digital labor. And Andrew Wilson's work as leading the Googleplex is one of the documentaries showcasing that. Mona Khartoum's intelligent critique of the the 1990s serves as a contextual backdrop for this topic. Here, in this installation, by pulling the braid of the artist, who was in fact hidden in a chamber behind the wall, visitors could experience her mediated facial reactions in real time. Matt Richardson's descriptive camera belongs to a rich corpus of works that address the human-in-the-loop reality of crowdsourced economy and the socio-technical blindness of corporate AI. It also anticipates the role of AI in biometric surveillance and taxonomy. The second version of this work by Ross Goodwin is a surveillance camera that searches for faces and describes them using an image-to-text model trained on various novels. Derek Curry and Jennifer Grodetsky's crowdsourced intelligence agency offers a vivid educational journey through the problems, assumptions, and oversights in the machine learning-powered surveillance. It centers around an online application, which allows visitors to assume the role of data security analysts by monitoring and evaluating their friends' Twitter messages, or by using an automated Bayesian classifier to testify the quote-unquote delicacy of their own messages before posting them. It also includes a library of learning resources about the analytic and decision-making processes in intelligence works. The learning process is enhanced by the playful transgressive experience of policing, which illustrates how the inaccurate judgment of decontextualized data or metadata affects machine learning systems used in surveillance. Similarly, RYBN and Marie Lechner's project, Human Computers, provides revelatory insights into the use of human beings as microcomponents of large computational architectures. It features a multi-layered media archaeology of human labor in computation since the 18th century, with von Kempele's The Turk, all the way to the recent enterprises such as SETI at Home, Amazon's Mechanical Turk, reCAPTCHA, Scale, etc. AI Chess was a sub-project of Human Computers. It was an online chess application with the 3 all-human playing modes: visitor versus visitor, visitor versus mechanical Turker, and mechanical Turker versus mechanical Turker. 2 years later, however, Jeff Thompson adopted the same principle for a somewhat different concept in his Human Computers, which tasked the visitors to manually resolve a digital image, which, depending on the number of participants, usually took about 8 hours. Outsourcing and commodification of artistic labor is closely connected with the human-in-the-loop complex. With ready-mades, Marcel Duchamp established and legitimized the outsourcing of creative labor as an effective method for questioning the notions of artwork and aesthetic judgment. Since then, there has been a multitude of artistic approaches to this strategy, ranging between pure exploration, technicality, and mercantilism. For instance, Perry Budd used her own website to solicit the visitors' voluntary participation in a transparently defined, non-commercial project on common goal to generatively remake Dziga Vertov's landmark film, Man with the Movie Camera. And here are some of the commercialized ripoffs of this work. For the outsourced show on the left, Tarrant tasked 17 artists to provide the topics, instructions, and reference materials for paintings. Then he hired workers in Dafen Painting Village in China to render the works. Postmodern Times on the right completely hijacks the concept of Perry Budd's Man with the Movie Camera. The project introduces ethical issues exemplified by the criticism of Aaron Coblin's commercial works with the AMT, such as the sheep market in 2006 or 10,000 cents. For example, in 10,000 cents, the total AMT labor's cost to create the bill was $100 US, but Koblin produced a signed edition of 10,000 reproductions of this work and made them available for purchase at $100 per piece. Artists also use AMT for non-commercial exploratory projects. For instance, Clement Vala combined AMT with iterative algorithmic processes to investigate the generative dynamics of crowdsourced work. And again, mainstream artists assimilated this approach. Tarrant and Manic's production line is a direct methodological clone of Vala's sequence works, but it results in a series of static forms. As a more straightforward critique of using machine learning for professional art production, Guido Segni's Demand Full Laziness satirizes the pervasive commodification of digital art. Here, a machine learning system generates images from video sequences of the artist's inactivity, so when he doesn't produce anything, which are then sold on Patreon. Similarly, Sasha Sedlacek's Oblomo satirizes the art tokenization frenzy and cryptoeconomic ideologies. It is a blockchain-based web platform with its own cryptocurrency and market, which applies computer vision to detect and reward the users or the visitors' non-activity. Massive human input is crucial not only for the dataset annotation and configuration of applied machine learning models, but also for the refinement of their quote-unquote optimization of everyday life. For instance, Tomo Kihara's Their Cube illustrates the implications of recommendation algorithms is an online filter bubble simulator that generates YouTube landing pages for 6 fictional profiles: fruitarian, prepper, liberal, conservative, conspiracist, and climate denier, based on a simulation of their previous YouTube viewing data. This project is live, and here are only the two landing pages, but you can see all of them. And of course, they continuously change. Ben Bogart's zombie formalist critiques the and the static normalization of digital art boosted by crypto market. It generates abstract images, uploads them to Twitter, and records the number of likes and retweets, and then also records the attention span of the audience who looks at the images in situ on the left. Twitter reactions and viewing time are then used to train a classifier that filters the forthcoming generated images in favor of quote-unquote good ones. In randomized living, Max Hawkins took a more striking and perhaps more responsible approach to interrogating the existential consequences of applied AI. For this 2-year experiment, Hawkins designed several apps that shaped and organized his life by the suggestions based on his online data: a city where he would live for a month, places to go there, people to meet, and things to do. Randomized living prefigures the emerging AI systems for the explicit regulation of life, such as the ambient computing systems or zero-user interfaces, which delegate, prioritize, and make the user's everyday decisions without direct supervision or input. In different ways, these projects reminds us that quote-unquote the Turk in AI is stubbornly not mechanical enough. It resists emancipation, and it is not easy to make it more autonomous. At the same time, their self-criticism, whether intentional or not, points to the ethically questionable use of crowdsourcing in art practices and to the broader issues of tactical AI art. Similar to AI research, which struggles with encoding the crucial features of human cognition, such as intuition, abstraction, analogy making, common sense, and inventiveness, AI art needs more interesting intuitions, meaningful abstractions, strong concepts, and imaginative analogies, which effectively address the wider perspectives or deeper issues of human existence. Various notions of biodetached and socially unembedded creative agency permeate both AI art production and its popular representation through confused or manipulative rhetoric about quote-unquote machinic artistry, autonomous creativity, creative collaboration or companionship. They promote a pseudo-romantic quest for human-flavored quote-unquote creative essence within AI systems, instead of demystifying these systems as sophisticated tools for statistical analysis, which have little to do with creativity per se, and should be more constructively understood in the non-technical context as socio-political apparatuses. Technocentric mentalities have been counting computational arts since their outset and continue to affect AI art. Uneven intellectual breadth and depth, biased or limited contextual awareness, and sketchy art historical knowledge affect many artists' conceptual thinking, methodologies, and outcomes. Conversely, by exaggerating or faking technical competencies, artists risk missing the important technological aspects. Tactical media art is inevitably entangled with the technological systems it critiques, so the protest sometimes becomes a mirror image of its target. Also, by identifying the loopholes and weaknesses in the systems they critique, the artists expose their efforts to exploitation and recuperation. Critical impact is sometimes affected by the pretentious or didactic representational strategies. Technical works often gain significance in the echo chambery academic communities, while their real-world impact requires more stringent assessment. Wider audience easily recognizes this ritualization of values as aloofness or cynicism, which leads to indifference, distrust, or resentment. By identifying and understanding these issues, artists can find new ways to intervene critically and productively in the AI-influenced political reality and to direct computational arts toward a socially responsible and epistemologically relevant expressive stratum. In order to attain topical relevance and expressive economy in placing the cognitive, technical, and sociopolitical problems of AI firmly within the context of human nature and existence, artists need to balance their procedural skills with motivational sincerity and ideational cogency, maintain a critical outlook on their poetic devices, and adopt responsible monetization models. This ethos requires cultivation through expressive diversification, experimental freedom, playfulness, conceptually strong hacking, imaginative discovery, and self-critical thinking. The political nature of AI obliges artists not only to exploit, but to deconstruct and explore their expressive means by recognizing the injustices in their notional, relational, technical, and other layers. Artists should articulate and respect their productive frameworks as experiential processes that stir the audience's inquisitiveness and critical thinking, stimulate imagination, and encourage progressive action. To counter the recuperative sophistication of infocapitalism, stealthy subversiveness and subterfuge seem to be more prudent than over-explanation or spectacularism. But artists share these responsibilities with scientists, entrepreneurs, cultural agents, and broader society. To demystify AI and to correct its flaws, science, technology, businesses, and education need a thorough reconfiguration of epistemological and ethical standards. I discuss these and other issues of AI art in several papers. In the upcoming paper specifically about this topic, I provide, of course, a broader context with additional examples and discussion. If you're interested for this lecture, the slides are available on the landing page of my website. And with that, I will say çok teşekkürler, and that is my bad Turkish pronunciation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your fascinating research, sharing it with us. And I look forward for the questions from the audience here at the Institute and also online. So if you have some questions. Okay. I have a question first for Drago. I want to know, what do you think, what is the future of publishing music online? Are artists finally taking the matter into their own hands? Because now some superstars are publishing by themselves. So do you think the future is that even smaller artists are available to do it by themselves and completely cutting the middleman or the publishers and being able to earn their own money without sharing it with anybody?
Thank you for this question, and I'm really sorry that Alexandra cannot be with us today because it is her daily job. She will be a real professional to address this question. And from perspective of our paper, the frontier that we are trying to anticipate and address is not the music itself. It is actually the performance art, which is far more than just the audio or the music involved. And the best answer would be that the outcome of new streaming regulation in criticism across European Union and in the UK is going to help matters, because it seems that European Union is trying to fight the large platforms in sharing better economics and fair royalties. But it is just the beginning. So I feel that music is just one part of a video and script. And to us, it is living art and performance itself that is digital content that we would like to incorporate in contractual agreements between streamers and performance. I hope this is answering the question completely.
Okay, Çağdaş, I have a question for you. Do you think the AI author can ever resemble the quality of the human-made work of art?
I guess that's one of the main questions we also ask, because I mean, there seems to be a prejudice or linear thinking, especially coming from other disciplines, non-literary disciplines, to be clear, to computer-generated texts, whether it is enough, whether it demonstrates sufficient performance like its human counterpart. But I guess that's the point here. I mean, people are into computer-generated texts, both from literary disciplines as well as literary disciplines, and it has a certain type of charm. So they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. The question then are, in relation to your question as well, can we develop novel ways to evaluate these texts rather than just merely comparing them to human-generated texts? I think that's the question that we need to ask here. The issue of human likeness, whether a computer-generated text resembles or whether it's better than human-generated text or not, perhaps is a secondary question. I mean, because how are we supposed to evaluate creativity or originality, let alone literariness of literary texts? Where does that quality come from? I think we need to delve into that question rather than just comparing computer-generated texts to human-generated texts. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And Professor Grba, I have a lot of questions for you as always, but you mostly talked about AI-generated art that artists use with integrity and ethics, and they just use it as another visual, like technological tool to create their art. But I wonder what you think of the open source now websites when you just can put a sentence and create an image. What do you think about that? Do you know what you think of, like DALL-E?
I have to ask you, Jelena, how does this question relate to the topic of my presentation? Because I don't see the relationship directly, I have to say.
AI-generated art. I just want to ask you because I'm very interested in your opinion.
Okay, so you are exploiting your position right now. Okay, no, of course it's a pleasure to answer. Well, you know, there are a lot of how should I say, different approaches to human creativity. You know, using technical means. The one that you mentioned is one of them. I don't see it as superior or inferior to any other. You know, to other possible approaches. What interests me individually as a researcher, as an artist, and as a spectator, you know, as an observer, is if the artwork works. You know what I mean? If it functions well, if it works for me or broader audience, if it touches some interesting topic or asks some interesting questions. This is the essence of my, how should I say, critical approach to different work. So what I think in general about these tools is, of course, they are more than welcome. I mean, anything that can be somehow utilized for creative production is, you know, I don't know how to put it. It can be utilized in a very, very, in various ways. You know, technology is itself apolitical, but in essence, it is highly political because we use it, humans use it. So in that sense, the politicality of the technology per se is unavoidable. But on the other hand, like I said, as a creator, as an enthusiast for creative production, and you know, for making things and also consuming things that other people make, I welcome any tool, whether it is AI dependent or you know depends on any other technology or idea. That can help creativity. I welcome it.
Thank you. Are there further questions, maybe? Okay. Thank you for all your presentations and for excellent session. We will now have a short break, and then we continue with our programs on parallel sessions in AI in practice and new realities. Thank you.